Audio test 1, 2, 3. Hi, my name is Desmond. On the 22nd of September 2026, I will have been in New Zealand for 25 years. I moved from South Africa. I'm an auto electrician working at a large factory locally. Battled with a case of epilepsy for a couple of years, which I overcame, which could possibly be due to moving to New Zealand and having less stress. And generally when people introduce me to someone, they say, Des likes to blow things up. My hobby is photography, basically a lot of high-speed photography. I like to set things on fire and make sparks and blow things up. And I even invented a new form of photography that involves triggering sparks from the camera's flash circuit, which gives some interesting shots. My only regret that I've had in the last 25 years is that I didn't move sooner. One thing that's happened over the years is obviously my accent has changed a bit. I used to park my car, now I park my car. So that's something that happens to you over the years. When I was back in South Africa, I simply existed, but after moving to New Zealand, my life has changed a lot. I've had a lot of adventures, and my life got a lot more interesting. When I came over, I was wearing this shirt, and it says, "How's it? My name is Desmond. I come from South Africa. Yes, it is a country. No, we don't live in mud huts. No, lions don't roam the streets. Yes, there are whites. Yes, I do speak English. Thank you for not asking any stupid questions." That's the shirt I was wearing when I arrived at the airport in Auckland. Now, I've spoken to many people and told them all the stories from back in South Africa and things that have happened. I've had interesting things happen since I've been here, and I just thought, give myself a bit of motivation. I want to practice my video making skills and give myself something to do. So I thought, why don't I make a video about my 25 years in New Zealand? Make a video about my experiences. I'm hoping that these stories will provide some useful information to people, maybe South Africans thinking of leaving South Africa or moving to New Zealand, or anyone anywhere in the world possibly thinking about whether they should change their life, their conditions they live in, and move somewhere else. At the very least, it'll give me some opportunities to work on my video skills, and maybe it'll be interesting to someone. So here we are, 25 years in New Zealand. Amongst the stories that I have to tell, one of them is I walked into a local police station and I wanted to find out if the knife that I carried was okay to carry on me, and I pulled it out and asked him, is this okay to carry? A few months later, I bought an air rifle. I almost got arrested by the Armed Defenders Squad because I was shooting tin cans in the industrial area. I thought it was okay to do, but I thought I was in a safe area, but the rules are a lot stricter in New Zealand. One morning I even called out the police. About 4 a.m. I heard this noise outside, and just turned out to be a flat battery. But I was out there with my stick wanting to arrest the people, and that's another story I have to tell. As I said, I've done high-speed photography. I've been published by National Geographic. I held an exhibition at an art gallery. I've published a few ebooks. I photographed the second wedding of a couple after the husband got Alzheimer's. He proposed to his wife again. He forgot they had been married. So I ended up photographing their wedding again, and that's one of the other stories I have to tell. As I say, I've invented a new form of photography I call super speed photography. I can photograph things as I touch that button. It's not normal high-speed photography. It's something that's created by the event of pushing the button. You just wouldn't want to be a hungry fly landing on the sugar when I'm busy looking at the type of patterns the sparks make in it. I've climbed Mount Ruapehu on the North Island, the highest mountain on the North Island. I've slept in a snow cave on top, almost died coming down the very next day. Climbed halfway up that same mountain and slept on top of the snow. I slept in a snow mound halfway up Mount Ruapehu and had to come down in a whiteout. I've walked 95 kilometers over 5 days through 2 mountain ranges. I've walked just over 16 hours around Mount Ruapehu, which is a 67 kilometer hike as part of the 24-hour challenge. Another story I have to tell. Almost died in a car crash. Got some interesting pictures of that. Picked up 5 times my body weight just to see how much weight I could lift. And at one stage I looked after an injured praying mantis for 6 months and almost had a book published by Disney about that. That's a whole new story, different story. And recently I inadvertently helped a homeless man get a house. That was in the news. I can share that story later on. But that'll be like in the 25-year mark. So these will be some of the stories I tell as I document my 25 years in New Zealand. Now, why? Why would I leave South Africa? People say to me, why would you leave South Africa? It's such a beautiful country. If you've spoken to South Africans, they would have told you the stories and you'll know exactly why they left. But I tell people, my general answer is, the whole world is a beautiful place. It's the people that mess it up. And that's basically the case. There's a lot of beautiful places in the world. The only reason you can't go there is because of the people that are there. And sometimes I'll have some people say to me, well, what do you expect from that country? You persecuted the people. And I say, hang on a minute, have you got evidence that I persecuted the people? They say, well, you're a white South African. And I say to them, what is prejudice? And they say, well, it's when you prejudge someone based on the colour of their skin and where they come from. And I say, isn't that a bit ironic? You're telling me you're a white South African, therefore you did these things? I wanted change, I wanted equality for everyone. And you'll just find just about anywhere, the average person just wants to live their life, go to work, go to school, whatever, and get along with everyone else. It's always just the minority that causes the problems. Amongst the stories that I have to tell of why I left South Africa, mine were pretty mild compared to Joe, a guy that I met back in Hamilton in New Zealand, who had moved over. He had 2 bullet wounds in him, one in his shoulder and one in his knee, from 2 separate incidents. The one incident was a home invasion. His wife got shot in the stomach, he got shot in the knee. The other one was a carjacking. They pulled him out of his car and he said, after he came to New Zealand, he was still struggling to come to the concept of not having 2 guns on him all the time, one tucked in his pocket and one under the seat. Well, as I say, my experiences weren't as bad as his, but I've had a gun in my face. I've held a knife at a man's throat just to stop him squirming while I was holding him. A few weeks later, I wrestled a man to the ground, chased down robbers and recovered stolen goods. Amongst the experiences I had from before the new South Africa, let's say in the days of apartheid, the one day I took my girlfriend home. I used to drive her home and walk her upstairs to the flats where she lived, come outside, walk around the corner, and I was driving my dad's little van that the sliding door wasn't locking properly, so I had a bit of rope tied up holding it in place. And there's this elderly African gentleman, and he's pulling on this door and he's pulling it backwards and forwards trying to break it open. And I came around the corner, he made eye contact with me, and I thought, I'm the slowest runner in town. There's no ways I'll catch this guy. So I turn around and I pretended I was window shopping. Back in the days before the internet, you go and look at stuff from the windows. I was staring in the window there, and I watched his reflection behind me. And he was looking at me, and then he turned his back on me, and I ran and I dived on him, pulled him down on the ground, and I was busy holding him and he was struggling, and this other guy came up to me and said, can I help you? And I said, you just pass me my knife under my car seat there. And he said to me, you're not going to hurt him, are you? And I just sort of whispered, no, just give him a fright. So he goes and he gets it to me, and I took it and held it at the guy's throat. And I wasn't going to hurt him or anything, it was just to stop him squirming. And within a few minutes, the police were coming around the corner and they loaded him up and took him away. There's always police in the area because there's always something going on. And about 2 weeks later, I'm there in my pickup and I walked my girlfriend up to her flat again, come back down again, and this time I was parked outside the entrance, and I had forgotten to lock my doors properly, and there's the door wide open on my pickup. And I looked around and I saw this guy walking down the street all bundled up like this with his jacket around, and there had been a blue blanket on the seat that I normally had across the seats there. So I thought, once again, if I shout and chase him, he'll get away from me. So I pretended to be jogging. I jogged past him, just ignored him, went around the corner, turned around, straightened myself off, and then I started walking back, and I looked and I saw this blue blanket there. And as I got next to him, I jumped on him, threw him on the ground, and at that moment the police were coming across the lights. They came around the corner and loaded him up and took him away. So that's just a normal day before things got really bad in South Africa. A year or so later, out shopping, and I hear these 2 gunshots. So I'm like a magnet to trouble. You know, I want to go and see what's happening and help whoever's in trouble. And I drive down, and there's this big fat guy. We'll call him fat guy and skinny guy, and this African man, and he's holding skinny guy and he's hitting him on the head with the gun. And this guy's pulling and carrying on, he's holding him and hitting him, and there's just blood running down everywhere. And I jumped out. I should have probably minded my own business, but I always had some sort of backup on me, and I had this tucked up behind my back. And I went up to him and I said, "What's going on? You know, just let the police come," because this woman had just come out and said, "I've called the police." So I go to the fat guy and I said, "Look, just leave the guy alone. The police are on their way." And turns around, puts the gun in my face, and he says, "You keep out of it." And I just pushed the gun away and I said, "Don't put that thing in my face." And a few minutes later the police arrived, and they're loading this guy up, and the police said to him, "Well, what happened?" And he says, "Well, this guy stole my bank bag from my seat, and he was running away, so I tried to shoot him in the legs." The policeman said to him, "You fired at street level in town." He said, "Oh, no. I shot him to the ground. I shot him to the ground as a warning." Police said, "Okay, well, come and show me these bullet holes in the ground." And he couldn't, because he had fired at street level. And so I went to the policeman and I said, "He stuck his gun in my face. Can you charge him for that?" He said, "Well, you'll have to have a civil case against him for that." I said, "Well, you're going to charge him for anything?" He said, "Yeah, we're going to charge him for shooting at street level." I said, "Yeah, no, that's okay, fine. Off I'll go." Another incident. I'm outside they call it a dairy here. We called it a tea room in South Africa. But I stopped to buy a Coke or something, and as I'm about to take off, my girlfriend's sitting next to me. This woman runs up to the car window. "Oh, help me, 2 guys just took off with a whole bunch of clothing they stole. They're going around the corner there." So I drive down the road, and I look to the right, and I just see them disappearing up a one-way street. And I thought, right, I'm going to get them. And I drove, and I thought, oh heck, it's a one-way street. If I drive up behind them, they're going to know I'm chasing them because I'm going the wrong way. I drove to the next road, turned up that road, and then met them head on as they were coming out. Now, my girlfriend had convinced me to get rid of the pick handle that I kept under the seat, because just keep it there and you keep it under the seat, and if a taxi cuts you off, you just pull it out and you whack the side of the taxi like that, and they veer all over the place and get out to try and work out what hit them, and you just keep driving. I actually also had a 4-pound hammer under my seat and a can of spray paint, so every time I rammed one of them I could just get out and spray over the cracks. But that's another story. But this guy comes out, and now I have this police baton with a handle sticking out the side. And I grab the one guy, the other guy heads across the street, and the guy I'm holding, he turns around and there's a fence in the way, so he drops everything, and I grab him and he starts struggling, and I hit him in the face and throw him on the ground. And then I got my girlfriend to get out the rope. She gets out I always had a rope behind my seat. I got out the rope, I tied his hands together behind his back, tied his feet together, and I tied his head to his feet so he's rocking on his belly. And then I gave her this, I had a wiper motor or something like that I was working on because I'm an auto electrician. And this other big guy came along and said, "Can I help?" And I said, "You stay with my wife, and I'm going after the other guy." And apparently while I was away, the guy starts struggling. So my wife takes this thing and says, "You move, I'm going to hit you." So he just stopped struggling. So I head up the road there, and there's the police loading up the second guy. And I pulled up next to them and I said, "Did you just catch a guy who stole some clothing?" They said, "Yep." I said, "I've got his mate down the road." So I drive down the road, I've got 3 police cars following me. We turn up there, there's the guy busy rocking on his belly there with his hands tied behind his back. And all the police busy loading him up. And I went to the policeman, I said, "Am I going to have to make a statement now?" He said, No, you can go if you want." I was like, "I can have my rope back." So I untied him, gave me my rope, and off I go. Another adventure. And those were pretty mild things. It got worse. Nelson Mandela started ruling the country, and I would probably say that I've got a case of post-traumatic stress disorder. I couldn't go back again. 6 or 7 years ago, my father was dying in hospital. I bought a plane ticket, I cancelled it the next day, lost $1,000. I just couldn't go back. I can't go back to that place for the fear that I'd get trapped there again. But Nelson Mandela taught the people mass action. You know, if you're in the majority and you want something to change, well, you all just put down your tools, you strike, and the country comes to a standstill, you get what you want. And it had good intentions. It accomplished some positive things for the country. But I had a friend that was kept up to date with all the stories all the time, and he had quite an analytical mind. We'll call him Andy. And he said to me, "Desmond, they've created a monster they're not going to be able to control. Now the people are going to use mass action for whatever they want, whether it makes sense or not." And my mate Andy, he moved to New Zealand 10 years before I did. And he was right, because these people started using vans as taxis. You know, there's a law that someone's not allowed to drive their car and use it as a taxi. But the Act didn't cover vans. So they all went and got vans, and they drove around in vans and used them as taxis. And to a certain extent, it's very practical and very useful. They do these small minivans that people could drive around and get picked up and dropped off wherever they want. But they weren't following all the rules. One guy had only front brakes. Police said to me, "You don't have any back brakes." "Yeah, my mate didn't have any brakes. I gave him my back brakes. I got the front brakes. Now we both got some brakes." And then some of them started this craze of, you take off the steering wheel and you hold vice grips on the steering wheel. You clamp that on and you can steer with one hand, and then an extra person can sit next to you and you can charge one more fare. So they're driving around with vice grips and no brakes and vehicles that are dangerous. And the police were giving them fines for some strange reason. So they said, "Hey, mass action, that'll solve our problem." They took 300 taxis, each with about 10 or 12 chanting Zulus hanging out the window, shouting and screaming. They drove all the way up and down the one-way streets the wrong way around. And they went to the mayor and they gave him a box with all the fines, and they said, "Get rid of these fines, the police are harassing us." And they got their own way, because there's all these people and they couldn't fight against all of them. So, as I say, I'm a bit of a trouble magnet. When there's action happening, I'm hanging around watching to see what's going on. I should have been at the back of the workshop, but I'm standing there watching these 300 taxis going past, and as always I have a metal pipe next to me. I've always got to have a plan B, just in case something goes wrong. And they're all driving past me, and suddenly the one van veers towards me and they spit at me as they go past. And like an idiot, I waved my fist at them, and 2 taxis pulled over, a dozen guys got out and they came walking for me. And now I look this way and I look that way, there's no police, no army. They're trying not to cause any trouble, so they just totally stayed away. And there was no exit at the back of the workshop. And a dozen of them surround me and start walking towards me. The one in the front walks forward, grabs my shirt, and I reach for the metal pipe and I swing it. And his head just goes down and up again. And I thought, I missed my first swing. He didn't even know I had that pipe. What are my chances against a dozen people with another 3,000 behind him if I missed the first swing? And then, for me, there's no fight or flight mode. There's only fight mode because I'm so slow. I used to practice twirling a pipe around. At one stage, I was trying to get a gym going and spent my days with a broomstick twirling them around. And I did that with a metal pipe as well. And I took this pipe and I started twirling it around, and I walked forward towards them, and they all started backing away. And just then, luckily, one of the organizers came running down, and he said, no, we don't want any trouble. Everyone get in your vans, we don't want trouble. And that's it. I mean, most people don't want trouble, but there's just a few that take an opportunity to do something, whatever they want. And they all climbed back and drove off, and they said something. And after they left, one of the Zulu workers that worked with me they said we'll come back for them later. So I spent the next 2 weeks watching on my shoulder with this metal pipe next to me, just waiting for someone to come into the workshop and try and kill me. So that's one of the big things that went wrong with the country, is that mass action means you just get what you want, whether it makes sense or not. And even while doing some research on this, I found some articles on YouTube where still today, more than 25 years later, they're having mass action because the police are impounding their vehicles because they're unsafe to be on the streets. But they don't care about the part that it's unsafe and people can die. They just care about the part that, hey, we know mass action. We can get whatever we want. You just go wild, run the streets, and just take back what you want. You know, from then on, things just got worse. The crime and the violence just got worse. About 50% unemployment. A lot of people had crime as their lives. You'd see TV interviews where someone's coming out of prison, and they'd interview him and say, what are you going to do now? And he says, I'm going to go back to stealing. That's my job. And that's how many other people think. And something I've noticed everywhere, even over here, is that people manage to justify stealing from others. They'll say, well, the insurance gives you new things if we steal it, so we're doing you a favor. You know, they take away that guilt by justifying what they're doing and saying, look, we're doing you a favor, stealing from you. In the year when I decided to leave, I was living in Pinetown, which is like on the outskirts of Durban. It was the year of the 9/11 attacks. I was living in the city of Pinetown. I was on heavy medication for epilepsy and doing 24/7 shifts for work. There were 3 of us, and 2 of us had to be on call out every night for the amount of call outs we got. And when you're the main one on call out, you go out, you get home sometimes after you've been out 3 in the morning, you get back 7, 8 in the morning, and you take your cell phone and you lie face down on the carpet and you put it next to your ear, waiting for the phone to ring to wake you up for the next call out, and you just try and get some sleep. When you have epilepsy, you've got to have your sleep. And I was on really strong medication. I was living on the 21st floor of a 23-story building that was called the Towers. And there were times when I'd get home and I'd be walking along the balcony and I'd lean over, look over the edge and think, would I be guaranteed dead if I jumped? Or might I just end up a cabbage in the hospital, quadriplegic, in South Africa, and just die there, not being able to do anything? And so my logic was, if I'm going to kill myself, why don't I move to New Zealand where my friends moved? And if I don't get a job and I die of starvation, I've seen something new before I die. Because a few weeks earlier, I had bumped into Andy's mother-in-law, and she had a video of one of their children's weddings. What used to be a little 10-year-old girl, suddenly she's getting married. But I saw this video, and suddenly I realized the universe is bigger than where I live. Life does carry on other places. They used to just be this dot on the map where they lived. And now suddenly, hey, I can live somewhere else. Life does carry on. I couldn't understand how people would still be living in South Africa if there were places where things were a better quality of life. But I just decided, hey, I've got these 2 choices. And if I'm sick of life, I may as well just go and see another country, and if it works out, that's a bonus. So one of the reasons for going to New Zealand, it is one of the easiest places to get into. You know, there's always a lot of people moving to Australia from here, and you know, they always want immigrants. At one stage they're trying to get in 50,000 people a year, and for someone like me it was just anything's better than South Africa. You still have people here saying to me, "Oh, why did you go to Australia? You can make more money." And I say, it's not about the money. It's about the fact that no one tried to kill me in my sleep last night. I'm just happy where I am in New Zealand. At that stage, working as a tradesman, I didn't have much money. I hardly had any savings. I cashed in my life insurance policy. I found out that if I cashed that in, I had enough money to get me over to New Zealand with $400 left. My pension fund took a few months to be terminated. My ex-wife came to me with a letter from the attorney she worked for, demanding that I give her 30% of my pension fund when it pays out. I said, you take 50%. It's not about the money. It's just about the fact that I don't want to die in South Africa. She just refused to leave. She refused to leave her family behind. And I said, well, I'm going to die if I stay here. I would go to work and doing call out at 10 o'clock at night. And now a truck is broken down. So you look up what truck it is. Right, I need this starter motor, this alternator, and 2 batteries. So you go back to the workshop. You've got to open this up in the dark. When people are getting robbed and murdered during the day, you're the only one at night opening this up, and you've got to get all this stuff out to go on a breakdown. 3 weeks after I left, a guy named Rob that I worked with, they phoned one of my guys I worked with, phoned and told me he was jumped on. He was beaten up. He went out to the workshop at night to do a call out. 4 guys grabbed him. They beat him up. They broke his ribs. They pushed his head down the toilet and peed on his head. And they knocked him unconscious. They took his work van, loaded up with all the computers and everything, and left. The next day, he was back at work with his ribs taped up and doing call out again. That's South Africa, you know. You work or you die of starvation. In New Zealand, if that happened here, you'd be off for a month on stress leave or something like that. But in South Africa, you either work or die. So, yeah, I suppose that kind of explains why I'd want to leave South Africa. So after cashing up everything I had and selling what I could, I left the X with as much as I could. With the car and everything, I just needed enough for a plane ticket. I'd sent a 1-page CV to my friends already living in South Africa. Within a week, I had a job offer. I'd never been on a plane before. To me, only rich people flew on planes. And I had to work till the last day before I got on the plane. And in the last week, I came back to work, and I heard my boss saying, they're saying it can't be an accident because a second plane has gone into the other building. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, no, apparently 2 planes have just flown into the Twin Towers in America. So I spent the next few nights watching these reruns of airplanes flying into the building. And I thought, oh no, now they're going to cancel the plane tickets and there won't be any flights and I'm going to have to catch a ship to New Zealand and I get so horribly seasick. But anyway, the flight went ahead anyway. The flights weren't cancelled. I boarded a plane and I left the centre of my universe and got on a plane to New Zealand. And the funny thing is, when I hear about these hijackings and things like that, I get excited. I think, I wish it would happen while I'm on the plane at least. You know, if it's going to happen, let it happen while I'm there. I can have some fun. Because I'd probably enjoy trying to wrestle them to the ground and stuff like that. But yeah, like I say, I'm a bit of a trouble magnet. I got out in Auckland Airport, was approached by the security, and he looked at my shirt which said, how's it? I'm from South Africa. And he said, you're South African. Have you got any biltong on you? I said, no, I don't like biltong. He said, you're South African, you must like biltong. I said, I don't like biltong, I don't drink beer, I don't watch rugby. And he looks at me, he said, where's your ticket? You got anything to declare? I said, yeah, I got this hunting knife in the side of my bag here. He gave my ticket, FS. I said, what's FS? He says, full search, go and wait in that line. I spent 2 hours waiting there. The courier that my cousin had sent to pick me up had to wait for me to finish going through there. I finally get to the end of the line there, and this Indian girl looks at my shit. She said, oh, you're also from South Africa? I'm from South Africa too. She said, why are you in this line? I said, I declared this knife, and I pulled it up and put it back in. She said, oh, okay, go through. Like 10 days after September 11, and none of my stuff gets x-rayed or anything, and I'm in New Zealand. And then, luckily, when I planned on moving, my mother had said to me, oh, do you know your cousin's in New Zealand? I said, oh no, I don't know that. I contacted her, and she said, yeah, I live in Hamilton. I said, well, that's where I'm going. And she said, well, you can come and stay with us until you sort it out. which is lucky because I probably wasn't going to get very far with $400. And I'm there like 9:30 at night, and her husband says to me, should we go for a drive in town? I said, are you mad? You want to get yourself killed driving around 10 o'clock at night in town? He said, this isn't South Africa. He takes me for a drive in town, and I'm looking around, and he said, let's go past the bus stop. We go past the bus station, and back in South Africa there'd be drums with fires burning and people keeping themselves warm, and alcohol on the streets and yellow liquids running down the gutters, and there the bus rank is empty. There's two little girls walking home from the movies at 10 o'clock at night, and I thought, I'm in a different place. And the very next day I pick up the local newspaper to have a look at it. On the front page news, this city councillor has got 4 signs advertising himself on his front fence. You're only allowed 2 signs per person. And I thought, this is front page news. I'm in a different place, that's for sure. And that was all 25 years ago. Things have changed a bit in New Zealand too. It's like going back in time, you can tell how things are going to go. But a few weeks later, I see an article in the newspaper. There were 2 murders in 1 year in New Zealand. It's normally only 1 murder a year. Now there's like 1 a week, 1 or 2 a week. So things have definitely changed here. But one of the interesting things I found out here quite early on, I'm walking through town. It was spring, there's a bit of rain around, like one Maori man said to me, this is what we call winter shaking its tail off. Bit of extra rain during spring when it's supposed to be dry. But anyway, winter shook its tail off for another 2 months still. And then I go into the warehouse, which is the big retail shop. I'm looking around, I said to the woman, I can't find the raincoats. She said, oh no, we won't have any raincoats in summer. Winter's the rainy season. I said, but it's raining. It's been raining for weeks. She said, oh no, we don't have raincoats in summer. And that's the thing with the retail industry here. They get to the end of a season and they just dump everything. And they get in their new stock, and then at the end of the season, like you get to winter and they got all the jackets and things, they get rid of stuff that they sell in summer. And then you get to the end of winter and summer's starting, suddenly those $50 jackets are $5. They just want to get rid of them so they can sort of fill their shops with something else. In South Africa you can buy the same thing all year round. Had a bit of a bad experience in the first week working, well after the first week, because I'd emailed my CV through and this guy said, yep, you've got the job. I spent a week driving around with him in his van and going on jobs with him. At the end of the week he says to me, okay, you've got the job. I said, what do you mean I've got the job? I just left South Africa and flew over here because you said I've got the job. He said, well, I couldn't just employ you without knowing you. So there he was with the possible prospect of not giving me the job. But I would have moved over anyway. But then the very next week, him and I go down, we get a van, a truck that's broken down by the river in Hamilton. And it's a little crane truck. And we drive back to his road living outside his house, because he was working out of his house then. He started off a little working out of the garage in his house, and now he's got these huge massive buildings. He's done very well for himself, but I park on a slope and this thing hasn't got a handbrake. So I'll leave it in gear, which I would never do normally, but the handbrake wasn't working. And the problem was that sometimes this one switch, I don't know if something had gone wrong with the wiring, you turn the switch on for the lights, the thing starts cranking and they go, and the engine starts itself. And I get out and one of the other guys turns up, walks up to me and says, oh, he parked in front of me and he says, what's wrong with this? I said, when you hit this switch, and woo, bang, into the back of his work van. And I found out how different things are in New Zealand. My boss said to me, important thing is, nobody got hurt. In South Africa it would be, who's paying for this? Because I'm not. But that's what he said. That's all he said. At least no one got hurt. We just carry on. And that made me feel a lot better. And then there are a lot of other things that I learned that are very different in New Zealand. I've always liked knives. They're a very useful tool to have, and it's there's always something you can do with them, but things are pretty strict in New Zealand. I go into the police station after about a month, and I said to the guys, I wait in line there. The guy said, yes, yep, how can I help you? I said, I'm new in New Zealand, just come over from South Africa. He probably told from the accent. I don't want any trouble, so I want to know, is the knife I carry too big? He said, how big is it? So I said to him, it's this big. And his eyes go like this, and he says, you take that off you and you lock it away. And like an idiot, I said, oh, you want to try and take it off me? And just being smart, I should have kept my mouth shut. He says, no, you take it off and you lock it away. He said, if you're caught with that knife on you, especially concealed like that, you'll spend the night in jail, and then you'll have to stand before a judge to say why you've got it on you. I said, it's a useful tool. That's why I carry it. He says, no, you conceal it like that, it's a weapon. I said, I conceal it because people freak out when they see it. He says, no. He says, you carry that on you, you're going to go to jail. I said, okay, and I pulled out another little knife, and I said to him, it's this little knife on my keyring, what about this? He said, that's fine. You can carry it on you, you can pull it out in public and use it, but if you're ever caught doing something wrong, you'll be charged for it, which is fair enough, makes a lot of sense. So, I'll tell you one more story before I finish. In South Africa, there's about 10% Indian people. And I worked with a lot of Indian people, and you get used to the accent and all of that. And then like this third week I'm in the country, my boss sends me to this job, and he says, it's a place owned by an Indian man. Now, a lot of the Indians here come from Fiji. And so I walk into the workshop, see this Indian man, and I say hello to him, and I'm expecting, oh, hello mate, how you doing? I'm happy to see you. But no, he says, g'day mate. And I nearly fell over backwards, expecting this Indian accent. And I thought, yeah, no, things are very, very different here. Like my cousin said to me, the first time you go to another country, you expect to see the ground looks different. You think, well, I've only ever seen other countries in the comic books and the ground's always green or brown. But you go to another country, you're expecting to get there, everything is going to look different. And the ground looked normal to me, but a lot of other things different. So, in the next video, I'll tell you about the Armed Defender Squad incident.